Professors, thank you so much for your time. It's an honor to meet both of you. And on behalf of the Bhutan Echoes 2025, we welcome you to this interview session. We'll start off with a question for both of you. What inspired you both to start the Abdul, Latif, Jameel Poverty Action Lab?
We were working on, both of us had been working since a good start of our career on problems of poverty around the world, and starting along with several other colleagues to develop and practice a method called randomized control trial, that we can talk about it a little more later. But the objective of it is really to test the effectiveness of projects and policies to fight various aspects of poverty. And the work was going along, and we found that it would be very useful to do it not individually as individual researchers, but as a network and a group of people, because there is strength in numbers, both to run the project and also to make the results known to a big swath of people, so that they can, learn about it, and potentially it can change policies and practices around the world. So that's why we decided to move from sort of the more traditional individual researcher strategies or small group in labs to a much more network strategy to start what we have called the movement. And also in the case of working against poverty, the people who are part of this movement are not just the researchers, but they are the activists on the ground, they are government people, they are NGO workers, they are people who work in companies, they are the poor people themselves. And to kind of get this entire movement working together more effectively and benefiting from each other's insight, and so that it doesn't depend on any individual person like us, we thought it was important to start this lab. So when we started as a network, it was a network, but it was only 8 researchers, so not a very big network. But today it's much, much bigger. There are over 1,000 researchers are involved. Thousands of projects have been completed, and of course it reached many thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people directly, and hundreds of millions indirectly through the lessons that have been learned.
Wonderful. Professor, would you like to add anything to that?
Maybe just the fact that we also came into this with the idea that poverty, I think there is a tendency to kind of try to reduce poverty to one thing or another. And we very much, maybe along the lines of the Great Fourth, we were very mindful of the fact that poverty is really many problems. It's not one problem. It's some people it's their health, some people it's their education, some people it's just the lack of capital. And so because there's many problems, you have to try out solutions for each of them separately. So it's not that we were never looking for the one silver bullet. As Esther often says, we were looking for the many silver pellets. And for that, we needed many people.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. So because, firstly, welcome to Bhutan. This is your first visit. And as we know, this edition of the Bhutan Echoes, or DLAF, is dedicated to the Great Fourth for his 70th birth anniversary. And His Majesty propounded the philosophy of gross national happiness, which is our guiding principal philosophy in Bhutan. So because it's not every day that you get to meet 2 Nobel laureates in economics. So as you both are well aware, GNH prioritizes collective well-being over economic growth. How do you see the principles of GNH intersecting with randomized control trials, RCT, approach to development economics? And can a qualitative, holistic measure like GNH be effectively tested or improved using a method like the RCT?
So an RCT stands for randomized controlled trials. It's a big word, but what really it is an experiment, very much like an experiment to test the effectiveness of a new drug in the medicine, or to test a particular type of crop against another in agriculture. So you take the example of medicine when you have a new drug to address a particular disease or a new vaccine. Say, for example, currently there's a very recent vaccine for malaria that was just developed. When you have a candidate vaccine, you want to test it. And to do that, since the beginning of the 20th century, we run this, or the scientists run these large experiments where they take a number of people and then they randomly divide it into half, and one group gets the malaria vaccine and the other gets a placebo. And then you look for a period of time who develops malaria and who doesn't. And if you have less malaria in the group that got the vaccine, then that's an indication that the vaccine is effective. And then at the same time, you can test that there are no unintended side effects in these groups. You can also test that it is safe. And it's only after these experiments, and hopefully more than one, that tell us that the vaccine is safe and effective, that the vaccine will be developed. In the world of social policy or policy in the real world, it's often the case that policies are just sent into the wild world before this testing. And then ex post, we're trying to find out whether it worked. So imagine, for example, sending computers in schools. So you could look at where, in general, someone will make some decisions. Oh, let's send all the computers in the school that are the poorest, for example, or in the schools which have good headmasters, or maybe in the poor schools that have a good headmasters. And then the computers are sent. And then after the fact, you're like, oh, did it work? But when you're trying to find out whether it worked after the fact, it's really difficult because those schools are poor and they have a good headmasters. So because they are poor, perhaps the students are not as good. But because they have a good headmasters, perhaps they are better. And we'll never know in the absence of an experiment. So what the experiment does is that it's going to take a set of schools that are candidates. They could be the poor schools with good headmasters. But within that, it's going to run this experiment like in medicine, where it's going to randomly select where computers are sent. And for a period of time, for example, 6 months or a year, we can see whether the test scores are better where they get the computer and where they didn't. And so at the end, we can know whether the program really works. And that's a randomized control trial. And that's what JPL does. And now we have thousands of these experiments across many, many, many different domains. And all of them have this level of being very specific and very precise, because by definition, when you're running an experiment, you have to know what you're experimenting and what is your goal.
So I think that one of the kind of starting points of this research is often that we don't actually know how, at the human level, things will happen. Because if we already had a theory which told us what will happen, then there's no reason to do an experiment. So it's precisely the fact that we start with the assumption that as human beings, we are complicated. We're driven by many motivations. We are driven by many kinds of, maybe we are, at that moment, we are not thinking, or we are thinking too much, all kinds of impulses. And what that does is it places a human being at the center of the economic project, rather than some robot that's modeled by an economic set of equations or something. It's a human being with all the complexity, and therefore with also the need to be compassionate in our understanding of the human being. And what I think is the natural connection between GNH and the RCT projects comes from that. It comes from the fact that the GNH essentially emphasizes the whole human being. And once you start thinking in terms of the whole human being, you have to take into account the complexity of what you do may not deliver what you think it will, because the human being is complex and the human being has many impulses, and there's no point in saying that those impulses, the impulse to be happy rather than to be rich, is an irrational impulse. It's just an impulse. It's what makes us human, and that, I think, is at the fundamental, at the source of what makes our cities useful and powerful.
Okay, that's quite fascinating, and I think not a very easy sort of. It's something that we could delve more into, perhaps for another conversation. But thank you for the fascinating insights, Professor Duflo as well as Professor Banerjee. My next question is about JPAL. Has JPAL conducted any research in Bhutan yet, and or in countries with similar mountainous landlocked features like ours? And if so, what were the key findings? And if not, what specific areas do you feel would be most ripe for an RCT in Bhutan?
I mean, similar is, a bit of Bhutan is so unique that I don't want to overstate the case, but certainly small mountainous countries, we've had RCTs in Bosnia, in Bolivia, in Cambodia. These are all mostly landlocked, more sort of mountainous countries. So but then the insights apply to different questions. The insight depends. That's what I said at the very beginning, that poverty is many questions. And in Bosnia, the study was about the effect of microcredit. And in Cambodia, it was about the effect of particular ways of delivering healthcare. And some of them work and some of them don't. There's no general principle which says that RCTs are going to not work in a small mountainous country. It's what the question is. Is it a well-posed question? Does it have an answer? And we don't really mind if it works or doesn't. I mean, the intervention that works or doesn't work is not, either way, it's good news, in the sense that we learned something. We learned that from now on, we can move on. We can either implement what worked or not implement what didn't work. And so it's always, that's the mindset we go into it with.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything that you wanted to add, Professor Esther?
Maybe more explicitly that, to my knowledge, we haven't done any work in Bhutan yet. Hopefully one day.
In Bhutan, we have a big rural-urban population, more in rural Bhutan. What specific type of RCTs, for example, or interventions would you recommend to address gaps between urban and rural well-being, for example, in terms of Bhutan's situation and unique social fabric?
Just in terms of, I know too little about Bhutan to be very assertive about any of this, but I think it's very useful to think about what happens to people who are living in areas that get developed. And a lot of those people are not ready they don't have the same preparation as the people for whom the city is built. And this has been a problem all over the world, that people get displaced and they don't know what to do. And the space that's created is not always mindful of the fact that there's displacement. So I would say, in terms of policy, thinking very hard about this question of displacement and who are these people, how do we make them prepared for being useful in this new city, new world, and preparing them for it. And that's where one could do lots of RCTs as well.
In fact, I've read that it's part of the preparatory work for the Gelofo city to invest in the people of Bhutan, to skill them for the jobs that might come. But we are living in a very interesting time because of the rapid development of AI. It is maybe not clear what are the jobs that are going to come. And thinking about that and maybe experimenting would be particularly valuable, especially given that there is this time of preparation that is already built in. It's kind of rare because usually you kind of launch the project and then think about what you might have done. So the fact that there is an on-ramp might give time to think about skilling, which it's never been easy across all of the projects in the world that look at skilling people. There is a big ratio of things that haven't worked as people intended, and probably has become harder because the very near future of the labor market is a little bit uncertain. Of course, some things will still be there, like services and construction and so on. But if we think about the level just above that, which really has been the source of massive improvement in well-being, like what would be now, software in coding or tech support and things like that, that is probably going to radically change shape.
Yes. In fact, I read somewhere that for the foreseeable future, the only sort of secure job or job that won't be immediately replaced by AI is plumbing.
And I think TV presenters.
TV presenters. We can all breathe a sigh of relief. I have few last questions. One is for Professor Esther. As one of the youngest Nobel laureates and a woman in economics, how has your journey been in a field that has been traditionally dominated by men?
Yeah, I think the economics has had a problem with the representation of women for a very long time. Not only economics, but a lot of the scientific fields. But economics was unique in kind of refusing to acknowledge it, because many economists believe very strongly in market forces, and so the idea is that if there should be women in economics, the market would kind of make them appear. And as a profession, we I think took a long time in realizing that there were some ways in which the institution of the profession and the culture of the profession was organized that made it difficult for women. And when I say we, I really mean we, because I think it includes me as well. Despite being a woman, because I didn't experience a lot of these issues myself, I kind of didn't really think they were a problem for a long time. And interestingly, it's by working on the status of women in poorer country, low and middle income country, both in Africa and also in India, that I've realized that there are some constraints that are just there and very present and very solid in cultures, even when people do not realize them. So, for example, I've worked on women village leader in India. And there is in India since the beginning of the 90s a reservation policy that enforces that's 1/3 in some states, 1/2 in other states of all village leaders have to be women. And I started looking at the impact that it had in the field, and it has a large impact on what is being done, in particular with more infrastructure towards what women need and want, including drinking water in particular. But also I worked on all of the implicit biases and explicit biases sometimes that makes it difficult for women to accede to responsibilities. And also the fact that when you force villagers' hand and put them in front of a woman, they realize, oh, actually, she's fine. Women are okay. They can run the show just as good as men. And that experience from India that made me turn backward and think about our own fields and how it's organized and how we need to be more mindful about invisible barriers that stands between women and success. And I think we should extend that to other disadvantaged groups, because today women is not the most disadvantaged group in economics. It's more people who happen to not be American or teaching in American universities, people who are, in particular, all of the faculty who are working in the rest of the world, in Africa, in Asia, and also people coming from disadvantaged groups within the US and Europe, immigrants, Black people, Hispanics, etc. And the same time of implicit or explicit barriers, like not giving enough speaking time, not recognizing the contributions even when they are there. Women are interrupted more than men, and so on and so forth. Make it for just an uphill climb. And there are things, that's the negative part, but the positive part is that there are things you can do. And I'll give you an example that's very small and very local, but in our department, we decided that the first 10 minutes of each speech, the speaker should be able to speak. Men or women, it's the same rule, but speakers should be able to speak, and we should hear what they have to say before jumping in and starting to, pelt them with questions. And at the beginning, a lot of our colleagues were like, wow, this is going to be boring. And, seminars are there to have a conversation. But in fact, I think now everyone recognizes that it just makes for a better experience for everyone, speaker and attendees, to start by respecting the person in front of you. And it turns out, I think, that it's particularly beneficial for women who get to give their point across before someone tramples over them. So that's just an example. But multiplying these small things kind of amounts to a culture change.
That's wonderful, very insightful. Thank you, Professor. And hopefully it'll inspire some of, the young Bhutanese ladies, young and old, watching to also keep that in mind. Thank you.
Well, I'm very excited to have to be interviewed by this all-female crew. And my understanding is Bhutan Echoes is all-female, or pretty much all-female crew. So, there is absolutely nothing that stands in the way. And this is also serves, having people like you in front of the camera and as civil servant definitely have this role of role model. In my work in India, we show that even a local female leader inspires girls to stay in school and their parents to keep them in school. Because they show that there is actually a future for a powerful woman.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Banerjee, you've served in many influential international roles. How do you ensure that local voices and contexts are respected in global development policies, in your opinion?
I think that it's one of the. I think what's actually the way the UN in particular is set up, actually gives a fair amount of voice to countries. In fact, you don't really get a resolution, especially on something of the kind that I'm interested in, like the SDGs, had to be approved by the community of the nations. What I think is much more difficult is to get the voices of non-elite people. And countries often speak as if they are one, and they're not. They're often, the interests of the elite is not the interest of the rest. And I think that's what's really difficult. And because of the way the international community is formulated, which is a community of nations, we fall into this trap of believing that because we call something a nation, it means that they always have aligned interests. And that's where I think the really big gaps show up.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Now in this segment, we'll leave it up to the two professors. If you have any message that you would like to share with our audience on maybe your reflections of your first few days in Bhutan, is there anything that you would like to take away with you, on Bhutan, on GNH, on some of the things that we are doing here that you feel could be a message?
To all the Bhutanese people, you have a very unique project in the world. You have the capacity to show the world that it's possible to live in different ways. I hope you continue to do that. The world needs different examples. Thank you.
We live in a very perilous times. There are many dangers, some of them physical, like climate change, some of them are, the possibility of future epidemics, many of them humans. like war and conflicts and difficulty to agree on very major actions we need to take, for example, fighting climate change. Part of the reason for that is the lack of an agreement of what constitute the main essential human values that people should have, and the grasping for straw for what's an alternative narrative. And there is a temptation in some corner of the world to go for, well, the right narrative is me first, and my family second, and my country third, and the rest of the world doesn't count. And that's usually corollary with I should get as rich as possible, as fast as I can, no matter what the consequences are on anyone else. And I think through the work of the Great Fourth, and also the resilience of the people of Bhutan, and another model can be demonstrated, one that is based on empathy and compassion, both from the leaders but also from people towards each other. And I think if that model, which I believe in my core, actually is the philosophy of most people, most human beings, we live for others, we live for seeing the happiness in the eyes of others, but maybe there is a feeling that we need to hide this impulse. And I think the King's and the Great Fourth emphasis on actually putting this impulse outside and putting them at the core of how we live our lives would potentially go a great way towards changing how people react to each other and addressing those seemingly intractable choices, including the wars and climate change and poverty and vulnerability and so on.
Thank you so much. And on that note, thank you for your time. It's an honor to meet both of you, professors.
Thank you very much.